Gallipoli, 1990. The Pilgrimage. Here's Andrew Woodward.
A couple of days in April 1990 will live on in the minds of all Australians forever. For these few days, the eyes of the nation focused on a band of Gallipoli veterans, World War I veterans, war widows and 8 selected school students on a remarkable journey halfway around the world and back. They were going to Gallipoli, that fatal shore on the Gallipoli Peninsula in southwest Turkey, where 75 years ago, Australian troops entered World War I. What happened at Gallipoli in 1915 has been well documented. It's been the subject of controversy, tears, pride and many a discussion over a beer at the pub. In 1990, the diggers returned to the beaches, together with the hearts of every Australian, to commemorate the 75th anniversary of the landing on the beaches on the 25th of April 1915. For 2 weeks, the veterans left their comfortable surrounds. They were thrust in front of the cameras and microphones. They went in and out of hotels, on and off the Qantas 747, the Spirit of Anzac, and they got better as the trip went on. It was a man named Bill Hall, patron of the World War I Veterans Association and president of the New South Wales RSL clubs, who in March 1989, on a visit to Parliament House in Canberra, asked the then Defence Minister Kim Beazley how about taking some diggers back to the beaches.
I took a tour of 18 World War I veterans down to Canberra, and part of the tour was going to Parliament House, and we met Mr. Ben Humphries, who looked after us for after tea, and after that the boys met the Prime Minister, and then Mr. Beazley came out to the lift, and I don't know, I must have got cheeky, but I said to Mr. Beazley, how about taking the veterans over to Gallipoli next year for the 75th anniversary? And he said, you're going to have a 707, and that's exactly how it happened. But you realise that the RSL have had this in back of their mind, knowing that the 75th anniversary was coming up in 1990. But perhaps they took the bull by the horns, and what started off with something small has now grown into a tremendous effort. It's absolutely fantastic.
Bill Hall has been working with the Gallipoli veterans for 30 years.
And this is what we've been a little bit lacking over the years. I don't think we fully appreciated what wonderful fellows they are. Individually, RSLs and RSL clubs have supported them. It's absolutely wonderful. The general public sort of say yes on Anzac Day, but from then on, you know, it's sort of forgotten. And you have just expressed what I feel. Having just met them now, they're precious. They really are. They're the foundation of Australia. They created Anzac. They were the first battle that our fellows went in as a nation from Federation. They were young in the majority of cases, but there's some a little bit older there with them. But they were absolutely remarkable, and they created us, and they created that heritage of the digger. You know.
Bill Hall said this before he left. Most would think he's right.
To me, and I might be egotistical when I say this, but I firmly believe that this pilgrimage this year will probably be the second greatest event in Australian history outside the 200th centenary. In fact, some people think it's going to be greater. Yeah. But it's uniting our country. Not that it hasn't been united, but there wouldn't be very many people in Australia who indirectly haven't got some connection to a World War I veteran.
It was the Wednesday before Anzac Day. All those going on the trip had assembled at the Lady Davidson Hospital in Sydney. The diggers, decked out in their green blazers, all made their way down to a landmark at Turramurra called the Sphinx for the team shot.
Right, here we go. Just looking towards my camera. That's fine. Here we are. That's fine. Good.
While it's all well and good saying, let's go back to Gallipoli, saying it and doing it are two different things. The organisation and preparation behind the trip was enormous. Taking one person who is age 90 plus anywhere is a worry at the best of times. Taking 60 or so of these elderly people around the world is something that's never been tried before. 370 requests had been received from veterans and war widows for the trip. That was narrowed down to 110. Later it came down to those who went. All of the veterans had to pass a thorough physical before being allowed on the trip. Nurses and carers had worked with the veterans for months in preparation. Many of the veterans had never been on an aircraft before. The average age of those who left the country was 94. Leading the medical team was Dr. Phil Henschke, a geriatrician from the Door Park Repatriation Hospital in Adelaide. Given all the medical things that could crop up on the pilgrimage, Phil Henschke said the diggers couldn't be in better hands.
I think perhaps it might be being killed by kindness. I think. We've got that's being flippant. I mean, there is quite a demanding social side, and I think perhaps they'll find it taxing just keeping up with the pace of what I call socialising. I mean, many of these men often live with their sons and daughters, or live in relatively small communities, and to induct them into a very hectic round of photo opportunities and interviews, I think, has been one of the demands. I mean, I think they've probably got as comprehensive a medical and nursing cover as has had the President of the United States when he leaves the White House. So I think the risk to their health, I think, in terms of intercurrent illness, the usual cuts and scrapes that occur, we'll have no trouble meeting those. What we fear is, I think, a significant illness that would leave a veteran disabled, not so much death.
95-year-old Tom Hutchinson of Croydon in New South Wales was a fitter and turner when the war broke out. He enlisted in October 1914 and joined the 2nd Australian General Hospital. He landed on Gallipoli in August 1915 as a reinforcement.
Are you excited about going back there?
Oh yes, we're building up to a peak now. It's getting that way.
And what are you
starting to churn up a little bit?
And what
emotions starting to build up.
What sort of emotion?
Well, the feeling of what the memories it'll bring back when we get there. We sort of don't know what to expect, whether we'll crack up or whether we won't crack up.
That emotion was always going to be a problem. That's where Chaplain Tony Lang came in.
Well, I think, I'm taking part in the service at Anzac Cove, and I think as well a lot of the old diggers will be very emotional about that time. I think a lot of them will be recalling old friends that are lost and who lie buried there at Anzac.
And what do you say to them in that sort of circumstance?
Well, actually, I'll be listening very much to what they're saying to me, and really just responding to their mood, to their emotions, to the maybe a grief. It probably will be grief in quite a few situations, and I'll really have to tailor my responses to the way they feel. I feel very compassionate role I see mine.
All now was in readiness for the trip. On the Thursday it was pouring rain at Lady Davidson Hospital, but that didn't dampen the spirits of those at a farewell breakfast for the veterans, hosted by Prime Minister Bob Hawke.
I count it as one of the great privileges conferred upon me by the people of Australia to be able to take part in what is now being truly and properly called this pilgrimage to Gallipoli. And of course, ladies and gentlemen, the greatest part of that privilege lies in the magnificent company, this splendid group of veterans, the Australians of Gallipoli. When I announced officially last Anzac Day that the pilgrimage would indeed take place, I had 4 considerations especially in mind. First was the intrinsic national significance of this 75th anniversary, the commemoration of an event which has never lost its hold on the imagination of the Australian people. Second, of course, was the quite immeasurable contribution that event made towards establishing a sense of Australian identity. Thirdly, I welcome the opportunity offered by this anniversary for Australia as a nation to make a special act of homage, not only to the surviving veterans of World War I, but indeed, as we should, to all Australian ex-servicemen and women. And fourth, I had, ladies and gentlemen, very much in mind the growing awareness and interest being shown in their country's history by the new generation, as evidenced by the thousands of young Australians now who are making a point of visiting Gallipoli, and doing so not merely as tourists, but they are doing it consciously and deliberately as an act of pilgrimage and of homage. But perhaps, my friends, the most remarkable thing of all is that these men, all of them in their 90s, should be going to Gallipoli with exactly the same spirit which impelled them the first time 75 years ago. As you know, very much has been written about what were the motives, what lay behind the thinking of those veterans who went to Gallipoli 75 years ago. Their sense of loyalty, of course, is without question. But when you read and hear the sorts of things that they wrote, and they were great letter writers and diarists, two things stand out most particularly amongst the thinking of those men at Gallipoli. And those things that stand out was firstly their sense of adventure, and overwhelmingly their determination to stick with their mates. Those are the two qualities which I believe more than any other encapsulate the original spirit of the Anzac. And now, 75 years on, veterans, you have one more adventure ahead. And next Wednesday, on Anzac Day, you will once again be with your mates at Gallipoli. And then, best of all, we will come home to Australia. Thank you very much indeed.
We just have a couple of minutes free, and I've got something, it's going to be a surprise to me as well, but Bill Bevis has prevailed upon me to let him sing a very short song. Bill is 95 and he's from Western Australia and he's part of the Gallipoli Party, so would you welcome Bill?
Thank you very much. This is purely a fun song. Don't take it very seriously. I borrowed the tune and made up a few words that would suit the occasion. So here we go. They try to tell us we're too old to really grow aboard. They say that travel's a word we've only heard and can't begin to know the meaning of. And yet we're not too old to know this trip we take will be a piece of cake, and then someday they may recall we were not too old at all.
To RSL National President Brigadier Alf Garland, Gallipoli has a special meaning. His father served there. His father later died in World War II. Brigadier Garland calls the diggers living legends.
This particular group of people, that is those who served at Anzac during 1915, really forged the Australian character and the Australian identity. All of the things which they stood for, all of the characteristics which they had during that campaign have been things which have been treasured by Australians since that time and have become part and parcel of the Australian ethos.
Disappointingly, there's a few people out in the community floating the idea we're glorifying war and taking these vets back. You can't agree?
Not at all, because if you talk to these people, they're not going back to glorify war. What they are doing is going back to pay homage to all of their mates that never came out of Gallipoli. And of course, this is what Anzac Day is all about in this day and age. Yes, we commemorate. It's not a celebration, it's a commemoration of all of those who died in uniform defending the principles of freedom from the Australian point of view. And that's what they're going back for, to pay homage to their mates who never came back.
As Bill Hall said earlier on, every Australian is in some way connected to Gallipoli. Captain of the Qantas Flight 1915, which took the diggers back to Turkey, Les Haywood, asked to take command of the flight.
I think it's probably going to be the most significant trip I've ever flown.
And what's your association with Gallipoli?
My father actually fought there. He's no longer alive, but so it's a sentimental journey for me.
Yeah. And what did he tell you of Gallipoli?
He spoke very little of it, but when he died, I actually looked through his old war diaries, and it really was a fairly horrendous experience, I would think.
So came Friday the 20th of April 1990. Everybody was up at dawn doing last-minute checks on the luggage and getting ready to board the buses for the trip over the Sydney Harbour Bridge out to the airport. It was pouring rain on departure day. The dozen or so vehicles and buses in the convoy out to the airport weaved in and out of peak hour traffic with a police escort. Led by Bill Hall, the diggers sung their way along. The buses were unmarked. The Sydney-siders battling with the peak hour traffic had no idea who these people were that were getting a police escort. But over the next week, the people in these buses would be the lead story on radio and television news bulletins, on the front page of newspapers, while the trip would have had to have been the topic of many conversations at dinner tables. The rain didn't let up at the Qantas jet base at Sydney Airport. Flight 1915 was in its hangar. A military band was on hand, as were TV cameras, photographers and microphones, all trying to get an idea of what the diggers were feeling. Some were able to walk up the stairs. Many of the veterans were loaded onto the jumbo jet in a forklift, normally used for catering and baggage. For many, one of the memories of the trip will be the sight of Jack Ryan going up in the forklift, waving his Australian flag, an item Jack produced on many more occasions on the trip.
Unfortunately, the inclement weather has not helped us with our loading problems, because by bringing the aircraft into the hangar, we now have considerably less manoeuvring space on the right-hand side of the aircraft for all the equipment to put the baggage in. I do anticipate that in about 10 minutes' time, we'll be pushing backwards from the hangar and we'll be on our way.
Many of the diggers were like boys with a new toy. Some had never been on an aircraft before and were visibly hesitant about the takeoff. Once in the air and heading for Singapore, all was relaxed and there was a sense of great relief that we were actually on our way. It was a good time to chat to a few of the Gallipoli veterans, finding out how they feel, what they want to do when they get back to Gallipoli, and their memories of 75 years ago. "94-year-old Ernie Guest of Waverton in Sydney was working in a garage in Sydney when the war broke out. He enlisted early and landed at Gallipoli on the 25th of April with the 13th Battalion. He was wounded during the Battle of Lone Pine and evacuated.
That it'll satisfy my mind. I want to have a look at the territory that we moved in that was so dangerous with snipers. I want to go and see the graves of some of the fellows. I can picture a lot of the men, but I can't remember all their names anymore. But I just want to, as soon as I see their names, I'll know them and know the circumstances under which they lived to die.
Over your life, do you in some way think of Gallipoli each day?
Little things crop up. Some happening will happen. It's hard to describe it quite, but certain things will happen and you say to yourself, gee, just fancy, I got out of that. You wouldn't believe it. And you'll be laying in bed and you in a sort of semi-dream, and you'll picture yourself in this awkward position, and you'll wonder how you got out of it.
The flight to Singapore took 8 hours. Responsible for the veterans' health in the air was Wing Commander Margaret Hind.
Okay, just to let you know where the veterans are at and how they've travelled. They've all travelled quite well. They've been enjoying the trip. They've enjoyed the food, the service. They love the young ladies, and hopefully we'll have the same sort of trip on the next leg from Singapore to Istanbul.
The diggers spent 2 days in Singapore, a time to rest, a time to shop, a time to get to know World War I veterans they'd never met before. There was sightseeing as well, including a trip to the Commonwealth War graves. These graves had a special meaning to one digger, Sam Thompson, 94 years of age, from Camden in Sydney. Sam Thompson was in the 1st Battalion to land at dawn at Gallipoli on Anzac Day and was mentioned in dispatches for conspicuous gallantry. He later served in Egypt and France. He enlisted for World War II, was taken prisoner in the fall of Singapore, Singapore and sent to work as a POW on the Burma Railway. Mr Thompson was a digger later in the trip who featured in the headlines, Anzac Shock, Digger Finds Own Grave. The backgrounds of the veterans were as interesting as the trip. There was one who had come all the way from the United States to take part in the pilgrimage. Albert Matthews, now of Clearwater, Florida, went into Gallipoli on day one and was evacuated on the last night. He moved to the United States 10 years ago, but heard about the pilgrimage through a granddaughter and made an application. He flew from Florida to Australia, now he's on to Turkey, then back to Sydney, then back to Florida.
And do people in America know much about Anzacs or Gallipoli?
No, they don't, no. They, you speak, when they hear of Gallipoli, they say, where's that? They never heard of it. A lot of them, some do, but a lot of them don't. They don't seem to get much overseas news like that. They don't appear to. They do of Europe, of course, but Australia, they know where it is, and a lot of them say, well, I'd like to go up there sometime. And I'd say, you'd find us a nice country if you do.
So I guess you're our Anzac ambassador in the United States?
That's what I try. I try to put in a word for Australia every chance I get. And one chap asked me here, an American reporter, he said, I've heard that the Australians were tough fighters. Well, I said, you heard right, they were.
Gallipoli veteran Len Hall of Western Australia is a man who has travelled extensively with his wife over the past 75 years and on the eve of the departure from Singapore was a little apprehensive.
Len, we're only, under a day now away from Istanbul. You must be getting excited about going back to Turkey?
No, I'm not, as I said before, I'm not excited, if you can put it in excitement. I'm just worried about how some of our chaps will handle the rough going, because it won't be easy. And I just hope they can. I mean, if the doctors say they're okay, well, they must be, you see. But I think it'll be a struggle for some, even with the help that they're getting, and they're getting plenty of that.
Len, is there anything you want to particularly see or do when we're in Gallipoli?
No, because one particular friend of mine, I thought he was buried there. He died en route to hospital and is not buried in
Also on the trip were 9 war widows. The husband of 70-year-old Alice Furs was in the 10th Light Horse that landed at Gallipoli in May 1915. Her husband Norman died in 1958. Mrs. Furs was taking a few mementos back to Gallipoli.
One thing I have of his, and I brought it with me, when he jumped out of the boat and ran through the water to run up the beach, he saw something gleaming in the water, and he scooped down, picked it up and put it in his pocket and ran, and several days later he had chance to look and see what it was he'd picked up. And it's an English crown piece dated 1707. It's just something that we've, had a special significance for us because of that.
Alice, is there anything you want to particularly see or do when we're in Gallipoli?
I'd like to see the place where the 10th Light Horse, because they got very badly decimated there. As a matter of fact, I brought a small bunch of gum leaves with some everlastings and some smoke bush, and I'd like to put that.
92-year-old Alan Salverson from Torquay in Queensland went back to Gallipoli 4 years ago on a private trip, so he knows what to expect.
Well, what I did see was 2 or 3 of the cemeteries, the memorials and things like that. But I didn't find I presume, with all due respects to you, I did not find the country very much different to what it was 75 years ago. I mean, there was no habitation as far as I could see. There was like sheep farms, but the only difference that I could see was the trenches had been. It was a February, and it had rained, and the trenches had full of water or brush.
Also on the trip were 8 high school students who were legacy beneficiaries. David Taylor is 15 and from Bathurst in New South Wales, who says the military runs in his family.
Well, I had a great uncle who served at Gallipoli and he was killed there and is now buried in the Lone Pine Cemetery. I also had two great uncles who fought in World War One, and my father's also a Vietnam veteran.
So it sounds like the army is right through your family's life. Are you going to do the same thing?
Maybe not as a soldier, but maybe in a different career, such as military law or something along that line.
Yeah, you must be pretty excited to be actually going to Gallipoli to see where your ancestors were.
Oh, it's been fantastic. The veterans have been some of the best guys you could possibly ever meet. They're great to talk to, and they've created a buzz about the trip and made it really exciting.
Yeah. They've all got a story to tell, haven't they?
Yeah, they'll talk to you for ages if you let them. They'll tell you their life story if you're prepared to listen. Yeah. It's great to listen to them.
I'll put you on the spot. Is there any one story that any one digger has told you that's kind of really hit you or stands out?
Yeah, one of the South Australian veterans, Wal Parker, was telling us about the friendship he made in the army, particularly with this one bloke. They went to school together, they enlisted together, they ended up being wounded together, going to the same hospital, and he even introduced his best mate to his future wife. And so it was a great story. Went right through his whole life with it.
Another legatee is Samantha Falconer, 16 years old, from Sandy Bay in Tasmania. Samantha says the pilgrimage has given her a good insight into Australian history.
Well, before I actually got involved in the trip, it didn't mean really a lot to me. I just thought of it as part of the First World War. But now it means a lot more to me, because I think of it as the time when Australia was first sort of brought onto scene.
Just let me look in my book here, Samantha. You're, what, 16? A lot of these guys went to war, the nurses went to war when they were around 16. Do you think you'd be mentally prepared to go to war at the age of 16?
I don't know. I think, well, I mean, who's to say that they were prepared? I think you just have to adjust when you were there. You'd have to be able to get used to it, so you probably would be able to. I'm no different to what they probably were, so I suppose I would be able to, yeah.
And have you built up any good friendships with any of the old boys? I guess the ones from Tassie.
Yeah, just a couple of them. They're really, really good. They're really, really easy to talk to. They don't hold anything back. They feel really free about their past. And it's good, because I thought some of them might be a bit sort of funny about it. They wouldn't want to talk to you about it, but they're not like that at all. They're really free and easy about it. It's really cool.
Do you see them as national heroes?
Yeah, it's not like, I mean, today the term heroes is a bit confused because of all the movies and that are brought out, but they were survivors, and they weren't, I don't know in the true word hero. I think more that they were just not pioneers, but they established Australia for what it is.
It was a tiring 10-hour flight from Singapore to Istanbul. It was the first time Qantas had ever flown to what used to be Constantinople.
This is Radio Gallipoli on Qantas Flight 1915, the Spirit of Anzac. The aircraft is now on descent, and in approximately 10 minutes will be landing in Istanbul.
The medical officers were concerned about this leg of the journey, as the high altitudes put a big strain on the hearts and lungs of elderly people. But everyone, including the diggers, had enough strength to cheer when the wheels hit the runway at Istanbul. Jack Ryan had mixed emotions about being back in Turkey when I chatted with him when he got off the plane.
It'll be sad tomorrow when we go down there, but I'm not going to let myself think of it. That's those memories, the memories you can't get away from, but still you've got to forget it. They're good enough to let us come back and say good day. That's wonderful, isn't it?
Oh, yeah.
That's the way
All of the veterans were well upon arriving in Turkey on the Monday. They would spend a day's sightseeing in Istanbul before heading down to Gallipoli on Tuesday morning for the dawn service on Wednesday.
Gallipoli, 1990. The Pilgrimage. Gallipoli, 1990. The Pilgrimage. Here's Andrew Woodward.
The arrival in Turkey was interesting to observe. Most of the veterans were pleased to be out of the aircraft, and all were looking forward to getting to the President Hotel in Istanbul for a rest, especially Jack Ryan.
When Captain Hayward said that we're now in Turkey, how did you feel?
Very nice. What, today?
Yeah.
I said, oh, yeah. You know. I never thought it'd be that, you know.
On hand to greet the veterans on their arrival at the hotel were Australians who had travelled to Turkey on RSL tours, while there were the young Australian backpackers who had come from all over Europe. "95-year-old Arthur Cambridge of Long Jetty in New South Wales was also pleased to be back in Turkey.
It's like if you've done a visit someone, I suppose.
Yeah.
But I mean, said how it's been going now for 12 months, and all the tension's worn off now. I mean, if you'd have got hold of them with the announcement, they said to go on the plane now, it'd been different, but nearly 12 months has gone by. Well, I mean to say after the 12.
Arthur Beasley is 95 and from Casino in New South Wales.
And what did you think when the captain said we're now back in Turkey?
Well, I thought this was very glorious when it was not long before we'll be shaking hands with you.
Yeah. And I understand you shook hands with the Turk, did you, when you got off the plane?
Yes.
Yeah. And you don't feel any...
No animosity at all whatsoever. That's far from that. We come here on a peaceful mission. It was not coming with animosity.
Yeah.
No, not in your life.
That summarised the feelings of all of the diggers. At the President Hotel, one of the Australian backpackers, Gavin McCall of Melbourne, felt compelled to go to Gallipoli, seeing he was in Europe.
To be part of the 75th anniversary. Once in a lifetime opportunity, can't miss out on it. So I'm only in Europe once in my life, so I thought I'd come down here and support the Australian cause.
And are there many other backpackers from Europe coming down?
I've just been on the road for 2 months, and I've met hundreds that are trying to find accommodation down there, trying to get down there. It's a very hard place to get to this time of year. And I've met hundreds of other backpackers that are on their way.
What's the attraction of Gallipoli for you?
Just supporting the old-timers that fought to keep Australia as it is today.
And you saw them coming off the buses. They're a terrific old bunch, aren't they?
Some of them, they just jumped down off the bus. You know, they'd have to be 90, 95 years old. Jump down off the bus and off they go. So I wish I was that good when I'm 90.
While in Istanbul, the veterans went on a sightseeing tour of the old city. This included a tour of the Bosphorus waterway, where Leslie Brooks, 89 of Abbotsford in Sydney, was in 1918 as a young, able seaman.
I came here with the British fleet and the fleet of occupation to the occupation of Constantinople under Vice Admiral actually, Calthorpe. I wish I remembered his initials or name, but I only knew him as Admiral Calthorpe. Flew his flag in HMS Superb.
It was Monday night in Istanbul, the eve of our departure to Gallipoli. One of the Turkish tabloid newspapers ran a front-page story quoting a veteran saying they're back in Turkey to apologise for what happened 75 years ago. It was a beat-up. Apparently it was a British veteran who spoke to the journalist. Veterans Affairs Minister Ben Humphries said we're not there to apologise and put the story down to some creative journalism.
We've been asked to come here and invited by the Turkish government. They've cooperated in every way.
But you wouldn't say, would you, we are here to apologise?
No, we're definitely not here to apologise. We're here to commemorate the 75th landing and the anniversary of Anzac Day.
Nor are we here, I take it you'd agree, to take back the bullets that were fired at the time?
No, we're not here to take any of the bullets back that were fired at the time.
In Australia, it was Anzac Day Eve. Pilgrimage leader Bill Hall made a plea to all back home to make a special effort to get along to a dawn service.
Yes, I do sincerely hope and pray that everybody in Australia will treat this Anzac Day even greater than what they've done in the past, because this is the first time in our history that we've had 60 of our veterans will be at Anzac Cove on this particular occasion. And I know that the whole of our country will be thinking of them on this particular occasion.
On the Tuesday morning, a convoy of buses departed Istanbul bound for Gallipoli. It was about a 4-hour bus ride following the coastline of the Dardanelles. The diggers arrived around lunchtime at their home for the next 3 days, the Bonjour Hotel, about a half an hour's drive from Anzac Cove. It was a clear afternoon. Sailors from the HMAS Tobruk were on hand to help the diggers off the bus after the bumpy journey. Also on hand were relatives of the diggers. One of the diggers met his grandson for the first time in 20 years after he made the long trek from Australia to share the experience with his grandfather. That afternoon, all of the diggers were meant to go down to Anzac Cove for a quick look. Nighttime and dinner was fast approaching and the trip was cancelled. However, 2 diggers were taken down for a newspaper photo for the Anzac Day papers back home, much to the delight of the crowd of young Australian backpackers who were preparing to sleep under the stars at the Ari Banu Cemetery, the venue of the dawn service. Walter Parker and Bob Ponsford both posed for the cameras, and Mr. Parker talked about when he landed at Gallipoli.
And I came off at night time, and I came on dark. We came out at night time. We came on at 2 o'clock in the morning, and we didn't see the foreshores or anything. And I was always anxious to see what they were like, and I hope I can now. My vision's not the best, but I'll do the best I can. Thank you.
Does it bring back any memories at all, Mr. Parker?
Oh yes, it does. I can see where we landed and the things we did the night we landed and all of that, and what we did many other days.
A great deal of young people have come along here to witness this event with you veterans. Can you understand what's brought them here?
Yes, I think the valour of the soldiers that came here on the first occasion. I think the bravery of that and the deeds that they won here, and then we lost, and then it was, I'm sure that's a great deal to do with what's bringing them back again.
The small town of Etchebat near Anzac Cove was overrun with young Australians. One of them was Deborah Brannigan of Brisbane.
Why is it so significant to you?
It's just something we've all been brought up on. I just think it's something that we've all lived with all the way through our lives, and it's sort of our mecca to come to Gallipoli at least once in your life, I suppose.
Karen Peters of Sydney had her own reason for coming to Gallipoli.
Well, I saw last year on the 25th of April an interview with Jack Ryan on Ray Martin's show, and before that I hadn't really been that interested in history of wars and things, but somehow the interview with Jack Ryan just touched me, and I really felt that I had to come to Gallipoli on the 75th anniversary, and it just so happened that I was planning to travel overseas anyway, and so it was easy for me to get from London to Turkey.
It really is something special, isn't it?
It is actually, and I'm only really just realising it.
And what do you think the old boys will be thinking in the morning?
I think some of them will be quite moved by the whole thing. In fact, it could be terrible for some of them.
So the scene was set. The town of Etchebat was full of Australians. There was a real buzz. Nobody could sleep. We had to be up at 2 a.m. anyway to make the trip down to Anzac Cove. As for the diggers, they got to bed early for what was to be a long and emotional but yet momentous day in their long lives, Anzac Day 1990, the 75th anniversary of the landing on the beaches at Gallipoli. Driving up to Anzac Cove for the dawn service, it was like going into the unknown. Who had any idea how many people would be there? Would there be too many people? Would it be cold? And how would the ceremony go? Then you thought back to this time of the day exactly 75 years ago. The original Anzacs were on their ships, ready to board the small boats, listening to the last-minute orders, preparing for the landing on the beaches. What were the diggers thinking now? Were they remembering the faces of their dead mates? Could they hear the gunfire of the Turks? Did they really know what they were letting themselves in for? After following the cliffside road around to the Aribanu Cemetery, you realise there were thousands of people. You didn't know how many. It was so dark, estimates range from 5 to 10,000. Australian and New Zealand flags were everywhere. The crowd, mostly young people, sang folk songs. They didn't know what to expect. The chairs where the diggers were to sit were empty. Then you'd hear the siren of a Turkish police car making way for the buses carrying the veterans. Then, one by one, the diggers were let in, receiving a polite hand clap, but then you'd hear 3 cheers for the diggers. Traffic problems saw the service start a few minutes late. It couldn't be helped. Crowds like this had never been seen at Gallipoli before. It wasn't cold that morning. There was a light cloud cover and the sea was calm. Australian warships were anchored offshore. The HMAS Tobruk had a huge kangaroo lit up. Silence came over the Aribanu Cemetery as Veterans Affairs Minister Ben Humphries made his way to the lectern to commence one of the most important dawn service ceremonies of all time.
I welcome you to this most historic ceremony. Today we honour those sons who landed on this beach 75 years ago today.
Veterans Affairs Minister Ben Humphries, now RSL National President Brigadier Alf Garland.
We are assembled here to commemorate that immortal day when young men from Australia and New Zealand, by their deeds of sacrifice, demonstrated that Australia and New Zealand were truly nations. On this day, we remember the sacrifice of such men for an ideal, for a way of life. Let us take strength in the knowledge and hope that our sons and daughters will never forget the example set by their forefathers. In our everyday life, let us endeavour to carry on those traditions established by past wars and conflicts at such tragic cost. We also remember the gallant Turkish soldiers whose deeds at this place 75 years ago became immortal in the defence of their homeland. We think of every man, woman and child who, in those crucial years, died so that the lights of freedom and humanity might continue to shine. We nurture too the obligation of showing gratitude for the peace we enjoy and the responsibility of ensuring that the freedom and liberty so costly won is not lost by our own indifference.
RSL National President Brigadier Alf Garland. It was then Prime Minister Bob Hawke who delivered the Anzac dedication.
The Anzacs who came ashore at this place, at this hour, on this day 75 years ago, and their comrades who followed them here during the 8 long months of the dreadful conflict that ensued, were not, despite all their efforts to achieve their military objectives, but because of the courage with which they fought, because of their devotion to duty and their comradeship, because of their ingenuity, their good humour and their endurance, because these hills rang with their voices and ran with their blood, this place, Gallipoli, is, in one sense, a part of Australia. So we return to this remote peninsula today, privileged in the company of some of the diggers who fought here and proud to identify in their exploits the very character of our nation. We have not come in order to dedicate this place. It is already sacred because of the bravery and the bloodshed of the Anzacs. We should instead dedicate ourselves to keeping bright the memory of those men who so unstintingly did what was asked of them on our behalf, and to ensuring that the freedom and peace for which they so ardently yearned, for which they so bravely fought, and for which so many of them selflessly gave their lives, shall not pass away. Let us remember too, in respect, the valour of those Turkish soldiers who died here in the defence of their country. As dawn broke on this day in 1915, a terrible slaughter began. Today, as dawn emerges, from the blackness of night, let us hope that the nations of the earth are emerging from the self-destructive practices of enmity and will build in sunlight a world of peace.
Prime Minister Bob Hawke, Chaplain Tony Lang read the prayer of thanksgiving.
We thank you, our Heavenly Father, for the efforts being made by the nations of the world in seeking peace and happier relations with each other. We praise you for the spirit in men and women which made them scorn the way of safety and venture all for the common cause of freedom and right. For all great and noble acts, known and unknown, which we believe by the mercy of God will bring about the final conquest of the forces of evil which threaten the peace and security of the world. Through Christ our Lord. Amen.
Chaplain Tony Lang. The Governor-General of New Zealand, Sir Paul Reeves, then delivered a prayer for the nations.
Almighty God, watch over all those serving in the armed forces and those who still suffer disabilities through sickness or injuries sustained in war. Strengthen and encourage those who have been saddened by the loss of loved ones, especially children deprived of a father's care and protection. Grant that the same courage and resolution, the same comradeship and service shown in the last great struggle in which our countries were involved may now be offered in the greater task of making the true and living peace. Amen.
New Zealand Governor-General Sir Paul Reeves. The commemoration of the fallen was given by Mr. I.D. Cox, the Dominion Vice President of the Returned Servicemen's Association of New Zealand.
O Lord, through the mouth of your prophet, you declared that all souls are yours. We thank you for the brave and faithful dead who willingly laid down their lives on the battlefield in the war and succumbed to the perils of the deep or of the air. We bless you for the dauntless cause of truth and righteousness. In your hands, O Father, we leave their departed spirits. Grant us to follow their good example in faithfulness and endurance, even unto death, that we may, with them, be found worthy of the crown of everlasting life. They shall grow not old, as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun, and in the morning, we will remember them.
There were thousands of people in the area, but everyone was silent, and one would think the same thing was running through the thousands of minds. What was happening in this exact place at this exact time 75 years ago? This was the birth of the Anzac legend. Some veterans sat there expressionless, some wiped tears away from their eyes, while others just looked straight out in front. The crowd was a part of the ceremony, flags were flying, flashes on cameras made it look like there was a lightning storm, while there was subdued clapping, whistling and cheering. There appeared to be a feeling of great relief after the ceremony. It was what everybody came here for, and it went off so well. Then hundreds of people swelled around the veterans to shake their hands and embrace them. Turkish generals also spoke with the veterans, while millions of people back home watched it all live on ABC television, sharing a moment in Australia's history. Despite the emotion of the service, a few of the veterans took time to speak briefly to the media. First was Len Hall. You'll hear a chorus of happy birthday behind this. The crowd was singing it for John McCleary, 103, on Anzac Day.
Well then, the dawn service, what were you thinking?
Oh, quite a lot. I was thinking about some of the regiment really that weren't here, put it that way. But I'm okay at any rate now. I took it better than what I thought I would.
And you're glad you came back?
Oh yes, I am now, yes.
This is Robert William Barclay, 94 years old, from Heidelberg in Melbourne.
Oh, it's a wonderful privilege to be allowed to come to it. I feel the highest honour in being brought to it and to take part in it.
Then there was the sight of Jack Ryan making his way up the gravel track.
Jack, you're never short of a word.
No, I am. No, you're always going to talk. If you don't talk, you must be dead.
And how did you feel? What was it like?
Oh, lovely. I didn't think I could do it. It was wonderful. I thought the Latin was good, you know. What a reception we had better than a reception.
Thanks, Jack.
It appears the dawn service got Ted Thompson thinking about Aussie rules and St Kilda. This is 92-year-old Jack Hazlitt from Bellevue Hill in Sydney.
I didn't know what to expect. I had no anticipation. I wondered whether I'd come here at first because I always get a bit miserable in the cemetery.
But how about this morning?
Oh, I was getting wet eyes, wasn't I?
Harry Newhouse got to see the beaches and the ridges in the daylight.
That Walker's Ridge?
Not sure about that one.
A shrapnel go is just in the... Yeah. All I can tell you, it gave me 2 ports down there, and the triumphs were sunk down there, searchlighting on the flag. They looked after searchlights, looking after us.
Group leader Bill Hall was unable to speak. RSL National President Brigadier Alf Garland reflected on the service.
I couldn't sing the last hymn, and I started thinking about all of those fellas that were here, including my old man. He came off, but there were an awful lot that stayed behind, and it just grabbed me. It was emotional.
It's awesome looking up at those cliffs, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
That they had to fight their way up there.
Well, I'm just told that it took them 15 minutes from the time they hit the beach till the first lot were up on top of Pluggies there. Now, I can't imagine how they got there in 15 minutes. They must have had wings on their feet because they were carting 80 pounds on their back. And it was a tremendous feat, and I suppose that's the reason why we've got so many of them left today. One of the English newspaper fellows from The Guardian said, how come you've got about 2,000 World War I people left in Australia? We've only got a couple of hundred. And yet we had many, many more Englishmen in the First World War than you had. How do you explain it? I said, I can't. But it maybe is the good Australian life.
Later at Lone Pine, I spoke with Margaret Dannelly of Sunbury in Melbourne.
Words can't describe it. They're marvellous. They're absolutely marvellous.
And you were down at the dawn service this morning?
Yes, we were at the dawn service. We were there about 1:30. Sat there and waited till that, and then we came straight round here, and we've come specially to see this.
And tell me what you were thinking at the dawn service.
Well, I was looking at them and I was thinking how marvellous it was, how they got up those cliffs, how they landed on that beach. They must have been waiting for the dawn to come, and words can't describe it.
Peter Cumbridge from Ballarat says the diggers are heroes.
Oh yeah. I mean, what they've been through, what they've done, and they can still walk and talk about it.
Helen Charlesworth of Melbourne, but now living in England, came over to see her grandfather, Walter Parker.
I was just sort of, everything was going through my head about what they went through, and just sort of the landing and up in the trenches, and just the many stories that Papa's told me over the years. Yeah, and to think that he's come back now after 75 years and is actually here. His eyesight's not too good, but he's sort of still being able to be here. And
He must be proud of you coming down.
I think so. He says he is.
Gives us lots of cuddles.
And what was it like when you seen him when you saw him this morning?
Oh, it was brilliant. It was brilliant because I've been away for 15 months, so since I saw him last, so I sort of never really know when you're going to see him again, and to see him in Gallipoli was just really fantastic.
As Bill Hall said earlier on in the trip, every Australian in some way is linked to Gallipoli. Helen Charlesworth was a prime example. Prime Minister Bob Hawke also looked back on the morning.
It was hard to tell in the dark at the first, of course. I didn't realise just how very close we were to the beach where we did the service. I thought perhaps we were a bit further up the hill, but then when the light came up and you saw there was the water, the very water out of which those men had stepped and into that hail of death, it was unbelievably moving.
What part of the ceremony did you find most affected you?
I think probably when you saw the ones who stood up for the national anthems and the ones who wanted to but who couldn't quite make it. I think that was perhaps the most moving part in a sense.
Did you ever have to fight back here?
No, not fight back, but I wouldn't have tried. I don't think anyone there today was really trying to fight anything back. If it happened, it happened. No one need feel any sense of shame about tears there today.
Mr. Hawke, the big question, of course, is that it's significant that this is perhaps the last visit that the veterans may well make here. What's going to happen to the Gallipoli legend afterwards?
I think it will live on, and in fact, this pilgrimage today, I think, will serve to ensure that happens, because a new generation of Australians is going to have seen the commitment of these men of 75 years ago, who were here 75 years ago. They're going to see that, and this is a sort of regeneration of the spirit of Anzac, which will go on, I think.
Do you think that's true of young people today?
I think so. You looked at the number of people there today. I particularly noticed as I was coming out, because it was too dark when we were going in, but by the end of the service I was able to move around at the end of it amongst the people there, and as I was driving away I also saw them. Just hundreds and hundreds of young people, and they weren't there just as tourists. You could tell that, and listening to them and talking to them was with a sense of pilgrimage that they were there.
Did you find yourself looking up at the Sphinx and looking up at the hill and wondering?
I looked round. I didn't see the Sphinx from where I was, but I really have a feeling that this afternoon when we go back there, I'd just like to get out of the car and away from the groups and just literally just walk by myself through the battle points. I'd love, if it's possible, I don't know where it is, to go to Quinn's Post. I mean, I think in all the reading about Gallipoli, that was very much in my mind, because it was a remarkable achievement. It was attacked throughout the period of the 8 months by the Turks, and it was never once relinquished. And the intensity of their fighting there was just unimaginable. And I'd just like to get out and sort of walk around and get the feel of it directly.
Did you find that after all the reading you've done on Gallipoli, actually being there and seeing the landscape brought it all home?
Well, brought it back, and you just try and close your eyes and imagine the men landing in the water and making their way up the hill. You've got to remember that it's quite different now in a sense from what it was. That road that goes to the middle where we were was not there before. It was just a fairly sheer climb that they had there in 1915. But even making allowances for that, you could get an impression of what an enormous achievement that was to get from the beach up to that ridge.
Do you think every Australian should make an effort to get to Gallipoli one time in their life?
Yes, I think it would be good for all Australians to get there. Yes, it is. No, I must say, for myself, I'd never read so intensely about it as I had in preparation for coming here, and I just feel I know more about my country now as a result of having done that.
As Bob Hawke said, every Australian should make the effort to get to Gallipoli in his or her lifetime. The memories and the emotion Gallipoli conjures up, you won't get anywhere else. It reaches deep into the heart of every Australian.
Gallipoli, 1990. The Pilgrimage. Gallipoli, 1990. The Pilgrimage. Here's Andrew Woodward.
Everybody was charged up after the dawn service at Anzac Cove. Everybody was tired physically, but not emotionally. After the dawn service and the international ceremony at Cape Helles, proceedings moved to the Lone Pine Cemetery. Lone Pine was where Australia suffered its worst losses at Gallipoli. In 3 days of literally hand-to-hand combat in August 1915, in an area the size of a football field, more than 2,000 Australians and 5,000 Turks died. 7 of the 9 Victoria Crosses awarded to Australians at Gallipoli were won at Lone Pine. It was around lunchtime. The sun was beating down on a warm spring day at Gallipoli. A large crowd had amassed in the cemetery, flags of Australia and New Zealand were flying, and all was in readiness for a wreath-laying ceremony. As the veterans were escorted in, they stopped to chat with the crowd. They were obviously enjoying the attention. But it was more than a wreath-laying ceremony. While the dawn service was highly emotional, Lone Pine brought back terrible memories for those who fought there. Just to walk on the soil was enough to devastate some of the diggers. And it was Prime Minister Bob Hawke who delivered an emotion-charged speech.
No place on the Gallipoli Peninsula was more fiercely contested than these few acres where we now stand. Known to the Anzacs, who captured it as Lone Pine, and to the Turkish soldiers who defended it to the last as the Ridge of Blood. My friends, let it be said at once. For us, the people of Australia and New Zealand, the heirs to Anzac, the meaning of Gallipoli can never be measured by mere numbers of the slain. In those terms, Gallipoli was but an initiation to the killing fields of France and of Flanders. And let it be said also that none of us come here to glorify war. For us, no place on earth more grimly symbolises the waste and the futility of war, this scene of carnage in a campaign which failed. It is not the waste of war in which Australians find the meaning of Gallipoli, then or now. And I say then or now for a profound reason. For the meaning of the Anzac tradition, forged in the fires of Gallipoli, must be learned anew from generation to generation. Its meaning can endure only as long as each new generation of Australians finds the will to reinterpret it, to breathe, as it were, new life into the old story, and in separating the truth from the legend, realise its relevance to a nation and to a people, experiencing immense change over the past 3/4 of a century. And in the continuing quest for the real meaning of Anzac, our way is lit by the shining presence here today of this small band of the first Anzacs who have returned. This is for all of us here and for all of our fellow Australians at home an honour, an experience, an emotion which goes beyond all words. But these men here, they know the truth of Gallipoli. They would be the last to claim that they were heroes, but indeed they were. In that recognition of the special meaning of Australian mateship, the self-recognition of their dependence upon one another, these Australians, by no means all of them born in Australia, drawn from every walk of life and different backgrounds, cast upon these hostile shores 12,000 miles from home, there in that mateship lay the genesis of the Anzac tradition. And at the heart of that tradition lay a commitment It was a simple but a deep commitment to one another, each to his fellow Australian. And in that commitment, I believe, lies the enduring meaning of Anzac then and today and in the future. In all the story of heroism and human waste that was Gallipoli, nothing is more honourable than the custodianship of this hallowed ground by the people and the government of Turkey for 75 years. Australia does not forget. At the going down of the sun and in the morning, we will remember them.
The leader of the opposition, Dr. John Hewson, delivered an equally powerful address.
75 years ago, in these very hills, the first Anzacs forged a national legend. It is humbling and yet inspiring to commemorate that achievement together with some of those original Anzacs here in front of me, here today. Standing alongside them this morning in the dawn light at Anzac Cove, I was moved, deeply moved by the haunting beauty and by the sense of peace. But only you, the Anzacs, can know just how different it was then. It is hard for us to imagine what it was like this day 75 years ago when these hills echoed to the sounds of desperate battle. It is harder still to imagine that in this small space 2,000 Australian soldiers died in just 3 to 4 days in the struggle for Lone Pine. Now all here is silent, yet nothing is forgotten. All here is peaceful, yet everything is remembered. Old enemies are now reconciled. Old mates are still as close as ever. The sacrifices of the Anzacs and others who fought for Australia since have bought the freedoms and bought the opportunities that we now enjoy. To them, our debt is great, but we owe them much more than just gratitude. We now have a responsibility, a clear responsibility, to live up to the example of courage and patriotism that they set. And let us ensure that Australia's sons and daughters will never again be thrown into the cauldron of war. As we endeavour to build an Australia for the 21st century, the Anzac example here 75 years ago will always be an inspiration for us. Their sacrifice must not have been in vain.
They shall grow not old, as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun, and in the morning, we will remember them.
If you didn't have a tear in your eye or a lump in your throat at some stage during the ceremony at Lone Pine, you weren't Australian. Jack Ryan was emotionally devastated at Lone Pine. That's where he was wounded 75 years ago. One person remarked to me at the time, the sight that will live on in his memory from the Lone Pine service is watching Jack Ryan. He kept putting his head in his hands and shaking, but later during the national anthem, he stood up, took his hat off, put his hand over his heart and sang as loud as he could. After Lone Pine, proceedings moved not far away to a lunch hosted by the Turkish government. There, the Turkish soldiers swapped military uniforms, guns and mementos with members of the Allied forces from most of the nations who participated in the Gallipoli campaign. Also on hand were a few Turkish Gallipoli veterans. Everyone, young and old, was looking forward to seeing and meeting them. Jack Ryan exchanged handshakes and embraces with one of the Turkish veterans, who were now very few in number. Also at lunch, two of the veterans caught the attention of British Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher. She walked by. One of the diggers said, "There's that woman." The Iron Lady stopped in her tracks, went over to the diggers and said, "I would like to thank you for all you've done." After the lunch, the diggers retired to the Bonjuk Hotel. It was getting on to 3 in the afternoon. They'd been up since around 3 that morning. That night, the diggers threw a party for John McCleary. He turned 103 on Anzac Day. He was the oldest of the troop, and on more than one occasion during Anzac Day, he was the recipient of a chorus of Happy Birthday. So Anzac Day had come and gone. It was an outstanding success. The diggers were honoured to be there, as were the thousands of Australians who came to Gallipoli to watch the commemoration. That night, news had come through from Australia. Crowds at Anzac Day services and marches were the best in decades. For many, that was the icing on the cake, knowing so many people back home had shared the day with the diggers. The next day was to be spent touring the battlefields of Gallipoli, a chance to have a relaxed look at the place most hadn't seen for 75 years. First stop was a Lone Pine cemetery. It was practically empty, in total contrast to the day before. Harold Edwards wasn't a Gallipoli veteran. He enlisted in 1917, but at Lone Pine he found the grave of his brother.
For many years I had a deep longing, though I didn't often express it, a deep longing to come and see where he fought and died. For the last 20 or so years, I've given up any thought of ever seeing it, and to have it come along at this late hour of life, well, it's a completion, so to speak, of my desires, because I haven't much longer to live, and I am so delighted to have seen where he actually lies. I don't know why I should have any satisfaction in that, but it's there anyway, and I'm feeling much happier. And the way that people of the area here have reacted to us, it passes all my expectation. I never dreamed that people could be so kindly disposed to people who had come to invade their land.
On Mr. Parker's brother's grave, there was an inscription: "We live in deeds, not years. Who most believes, who thinks noblest, acts best." It was written by his mother.
Yes, my mother, I think she first wrote it for my elder sister, a young woman who died at the age of 33, going out to rescue two little girls she thought were in danger, swimming. They called out and put up their arms. She thought they were in trouble. She immediately rushed forward. A good, strong swimmer collapsed before she got them and died. A lovely sister. And I think my mother wrote those words for her, but I felt they were very, very appropriate to put here.
Soon after I talked with Mr. Parker, a young Turkish woman approached him and said, "Why are you not angry with us for what happened 75 years ago?"
The same way, there would be no war.
You're quite right. Look, I've got no time for those people that won't fight at any price. I don't believe in that. But I don't love any war any more than anybody on this earth does. But I'm prepared to stand up for my loved ones and my country.
96-year-old George Fullerton of Bendigo in Victoria said it meant a lot to him to return to Lone Pine.
Oh, well, I cried yesterday when at the ceremony, and I think I'll get through here without a howl, but if I seen my colonel's grave, I think I'd have a cry, because he was a gentleman, a really lovely person he was. He let me on, it was him that got me onto the peninsula. I wouldn't have got on because I went AWL, and it was him that put me on the Gallipoli.
Does the landscape look familiar?
Hey?
Does the landscape look familiar?
Oh no! Here it is all ridges and gullies and rough and tumble. It's like a mine, like a gold mile field. Yeah, And I used to look through my periscope, and I said, how the deuce are we ever going to get across a place like that? And of course, when Kitchener came, he was probably looking at the same country as I was looking at, and he ordered the evacuation. Oh, we'd never taken anything. We were gone.
And returning here today, do you recognise anything around you?
No. Nothing, not yet, not unless I get down onto, if I got down onto the beach I will.
Despite the emotion of visiting Lone Pine, 94-year-old Bill Bevis of Perth, Western Australia, still found time for a joke.
It's been a most amazing experience, far beyond expectations, and the beauty of it is it's on the house. But quite apart from that, it's wonderful memories. I never thought I'd ever see this, and to be here and see all this where it all happened so many years ago, it's really, really thrilling.
Do you know any of the names here at Lone Pine?
Well, I came up here with 4 names that killed in action, and I found them all. That's the saddening part of it, but I think it didn't affect me as much as I thought it would, because I thought I was going to see graves and the chaps lying in there, but just see a name on the wall is quite a different effect.
Also at Lone Pine, there was one of the more amazing stories from the trip. The headline on Sydney's Daily Mirror read, "Anzac shock, digger finds own grave." Sam Thompson was looking through the lists on the wall of those killed at Lone Pine for the names of his mates who were killed there. On the list in his battalion, he found S. Thompson. Steve Saylor spoke to Mr. Thompson.
What's your reaction?
I felt that I now knew why I'd come back on this trip. I came back to find out what become of my mates. And in my own mind, I now clearly know what become of them. And I said, well, now I know why I came back. Simple, see?
You think it was meant for you to come back?
I had to come back.
Sam Thompson put this occurrence down to the fact when he was wounded at Lone Pine, he gave his official papers to some other soldiers who were later killed. Mr. Thompson assumed the officials at the time, finding his papers on one of the men who died, thought it was the living Sam Thompson who perished. A few phone calls back to the War Records office in Canberra uncovered it wasn't the living Sam Thompson. The S. Thompson on the list had a different service number. The tour of the battlefields then moved on to the Neck and Quinn's Post. That's where Ernie Guest served.
We had to, as it were, start a virgin battle up there because the Turks were only a few yards in front of us. You could throw a meat tin into the trench in front of us. So it didn't matter what you did, you only have to move your head a fraction and in between a crack of a sandbag and you had it.
After a tour of a few of the other sites at Gallipoli, the convoy of buses moved down to the beaches, Simpson's grave was visited, then it was down to the Aribanu Cemetery, the site of the dawn service. The diggers wandered around, looking at the coastline, standing silently looking up at the ridges, running their hands through the water and letting sand run through their hands. I said to one digger, "You were mad climbing up those hills under gunfire." He said, "No, we're Australian." We've all seen the pictures of the beach 75 years ago, but still, standing there, it's hard to imagine what it would have been like all those years ago. Many took the opportunity to fill a bottle with sand from the beach, as well as taking a few rocks and seashells as a memento of the pilgrimage. The sun was going down on the beaches of Gallipoli, a haunting sight. The water was calm, there was no wind. It was like nature was paying its respect to the diggers. Bill Hall and Jack Ryan were walking arm in arm along the beach. Jack was given a small bunch of flowers. He hurled it into the water and stood there silently, watching the current take it away. It was now time to say goodbye to the beaches and battlefields of Gallipoli. The main event was out of the way. The project now was to get the veterans back home. Back at Etchebat, the head of the Gallipoli Task Force, Ed Attridge, reflected on the past 48 hours.
Yes, I think from the veterans' perspective, it's been a very rewarding experience for them all. They've very much enjoyed it. Some of them have had mixed emotions about coming, but they've gone away in a sense feeling they've laid some ghosts to rest, that Gallipoli was somewhat different from what they remembered, but nevertheless yesterday, the 25th, to be there, to take part in the dawn service, to take part in especially in the Lone Pine service, was something very special to them all. There are lots of tears, there's been lots of emotion, but at the end of it, I think, a very rewarding experience.
Because one of the tough things is going to be for the carers and all of the people that have got to know and love the old men, isn't it? It's going to be a real break for them too, isn't it, saying goodbye?
Well, yes, I think we've become all very emotionally bonded to the veterans. As I've said, there's such a genuine, warm group of people, and it really is a great privilege to work for them. And I think we're all going to find it very hard to let go, to say goodbye, to put aside those memories and to get on with our normal existences. Because working with this group of people, they really are the last of a generation. They know they're not going to be with us much longer, and they've tried to get everything out of this trip, and we've been trying darn hard to make sure they did.
And they've made Australia proud, haven't they?
Oh, yes. That, I think, has been one of the most rewarding aspects for them and for us. The intense feeling of pride that has focused on these World War I veterans. We've felt the tremendous support from home. We've heard the calls, we've seen the telegrams, we've read the newspapers, we've heard about what's happening on TV over there. We've had lots of telephone calls from around Australia. And we know we've got fantastic support out there, and that's what's kept us going. It's really helped the veterans through this trip, and I think they'd want to say thank you to the people of Australia.
94-year-old Stanley Quinn of Frankston in Victoria also took time to look back on the past few days.
Well, it brings back great memories, and the landscape's changed since I was there. You know, it's been planted with pine trees, and it was very bare, not exactly bare, but it was only small bushes and so and there was, yes.
And what will stand out in your mind from the 1990 pilgrimage?
Well, I would say the dawn service and the Lone Pine service. Well, that's where the Prime Minister made a very effective, you know, and moving speeches.
And did you go and look for the names of your mates?
Yes, but I never found any of my mates. I was the only one left of the unit. But I knew quite a few in the 7th Battalion, which were at the landing and lost, or you know, well, 2,000 or 3,000, I think, even at the landing. Yes. And I had a look, but I couldn't remember any of the names. My memory's a bit old. I'm 94.
And do you think every Australian should make the effort to get along to Gallipoli in his or her lifetime?
Well, it's become a tradition, and perhaps it's a very good idea. But it's very expensive to get here. You know, it's a long way away, and you stay at the best hotels.
But this whole thing's been very worthwhile?
Oh, very worthwhile. I met some marvellous people. I even met a cousin of mine, second cousin, I hadn't heard of for 70 years.
70 years?
Yes.
Up 2 hours before the veterans and to bed 2 hours after them were the nurse carers, the unsung heroes of the pilgrimage. Ted Thompson of Brighton in Melbourne, who was 93 years of age, was rich in his praise for the carers.
Yes, it's really marvellous. The carers really are all trained people, trained to look after people as leading nurses, well qualified. And they've been instructed in every factor of care for old people. But they little realised that they were going into a job that required almost 24 hours a day service. And they've been unflinching in their attentions to all those that needed it. Even I seem to get by reasonably well. I feel that I've had their support at all times, and their friendship has been remarkable, especially with all the older chaps that probably are more disadvantaged than possibly I am.
And have you missed Australia?
Not really. I've been very pleased with this reception we have received from the Turkish people. They seem to have been very friendly. The trip itself has been a bit heavy for most of us. You know, the planes and buses and planes and buses. And the loss of time factor, or the gain of time, whichever it is, makes a big difference we've lost or gained about 8 hours, which means quite a lot in the sphere of rest and activity. And you just don't know whether it's time to eat lunch or whether it's time to go to bed.
Yeah. And what's been the most special moment of the trip for you?
Well, the most special moment was at Lone Pine when the laying of the wreaths occurred. And I enjoyed the ceremony there very much. Both the speakers, Mr. Hawke and Mr. Houston, they both spoke very well. And the boys in the Army unit were excellent, the display they made. And the bands and the singing, I really enjoyed the singing. I sort of exercised my voice a bit, which is pretty rusty these days. And I had a khaki hat on my head, which brought me back to many years ago.
Before you came on the trip, you obviously had some things in your mind about what you wanted to see and what you wanted to do when you were in Gallipoli. Did you achieve that?
Yeah, no, not really. I wanted to see some names on tombs somewhere of a very great couple of mates of mine, but I couldn't find them. I was wounded only a month after I was there, and the mate, George Grimwade, was killed with the same shell. I was taken to Malta Hospital and then sent to England, and I had what I'd call a holiday of about 5 months while they were sort of suffering in the cold conditions, the shortage of food, the shortage of water, shortage of clothes when the snow fell. Some of them only had shorts, and the privation they went through must have been very difficult. When I rejoined them in Egypt, I was told of different ones that had been killed, and one of them was a great mate of mine, and I looked for a stone for him today, but I couldn't find it. And it's very difficult to find somebody that you want to sort of honour.
Yeah. So was it worthwhile coming back to Gallipoli?
I really had no desire at any time to revisit Gallipoli. Travelled a bit, you know, but I never ever had any desire to go to Gallipoli. But going to Gallipoli with Task Force 1990 was something of an objective, and to go with the old blokes really was something to be really accomplished, and accomplished we have.
Ted Thompson pretty much summed up the whole trip in saying, accomplished we have. It would be fair to say Mr Thompson spoke for all of the veterans when he talked about the highlights, the lowlights, the hustle and bustle, the carers and the memories. After Gallipoli, the veterans travel back to Istanbul, staying overnight. Soon it will be back on the Qantas Jumbo, the Spirit of Anzac.
Gallipoli, 1990. The Pilgrimage. Gallipoli, 1990. The Pilgrimage. Here's Andrew Woodward.
While the trip to Gallipoli was over, there was still a long way to go. 4 days of travel, taking in Istanbul and Singapore, then on to Sydney. Many were now able to relax. The veterans were tired. These few days gave them the chance to lie back and chat with their mates about the past few days. Many were homesick. Relatives of some of the diggers back in Australia were woken up at 2 or 3 in the morning with phone calls, as some of the veterans just couldn't grasp the time difference. At the official farewell by Prime Minister Bob Hawke in Sydney on the day before departure, Bill Bevis, who's 94, got up to sing a song, performances he repeated throughout the trip. His farewell performance was at a cabaret restaurant nightclub in Istanbul on the Friday night. A few of the younger brigade on the trip wanted to go out and see what Turkey is famous for, belly dances. Bill Bevis got wind of this and said, "I'm coming too," complete with his green Gallipoli blazer and medals. Bill became the centre of attention at the nightclub. Not only did he watch, he got up on stage and danced with one of the belly dancers, to rich applause from the crowd made up of Turks, Germans, English, Spaniards, French, New Zealanders and Australians. If that wasn't enough, the singer then summoned Bill on stage for a few tunes, When the Saints Go Marching In and, of course, Waltzing Matilda. Steve Saylor spoke with a coy Bill Bevis about his performances.
What is it that you like about doing those sorts of things?
Well, I wouldn't know. I've never done them before. It's just on on this trip, and it was a case of let your hair down a bit.
Can you just describe to people who weren't there actually what happened?
Well, we were sitting there, as you know, at the table, just quietly having our meal and listening to the various acts as they came on. And this particular girl asked me to come up on the stage, and of course I thought it was a bit of fun. I went up and she took it from there.
She showed you a few dance steps, didn't she?
Oh, she was trying to get me to do her belly dance steps. That was strictly out of my line.
You were a little bit better, or perhaps more dressed than she was, weren't you?
Well, yes, she didn't have much on, although I suppose belly dancers are not supposed to, otherwise they wouldn't get the crowd. Anyhow, she was very nice about it, and there was nothing, really that anybody would object to.
And you were very nice to her. You were the perfect gentleman, weren't you?
Oh, well, before about a couple of thousand people, what else could you be? No, it was strictly a fun thing, and I entered into the fun of it, and there was a lot of laughter about it, wasn't it?
On the way to the airport at Istanbul, the party visited the Turkish Military Museum. There was a performance by one of the world's best military bands, while military memorabilia between Australia and Turkey was swapped. Then there was an old Turkish lady who was walking by and saw the Australians. She kept saying Çanakkale, the Turkish term for Gallipoli. This woman was very distraught, and Bill Hall then went over and spoke to her through an interpreter. The exchange was taped by Steve Saylor.
Çok üzüldüm. Babam da, dayım da onlarla beraberdi.
Her father and her uncle were killed at
Both her
Gallipoli.
father and uncle?
That's right. That's why she was so touched, impressed.
And why did she come here today?
Bugün neden geldiniz buraya?
Bugün tesadüfen geldim. Geldim ki onları buldum. Çok memnun oldum.
I was just walking past here, and seeing that you were here, she rushed in.
But did she call out because she's still angry with Australians?
Hayır, biz Türk'üz. Katiyen kin tutmayız.
Higher, that is no, we are Turks.
have to
We can never have any grudge against any nationality. It was a war and it's bygone.
Does she feel better now that she's met some of the Gallipoli veterans here?
Böyle tanısıydılar diye düşündüm.
I felt far better, very, very pleased. Again, the same wish struck my mind that they hadn't been killed.
And Bill, you went over to the lady, didn't you, and talked to her?
Yep.
And
I heard she was disturbed. Excuse me. I heard she was disturbed, and I felt I should do something about it. And I gave her a big hug, and she pointed out the Gallipoli badge, and somehow we squeezed together, and I think we solved the problem. I hope and trust.
That was a very special moment for many on the trip. Also on the trip was 95-year-old Kathleen Avery. She was a nurse at the British Field Hospitals in Alexandria and Salonika, looking after those wounded at Gallipoli. Mrs. Avery was looking forward to getting back home.
Well, I am. It's beginning to get a little bit tiring, but it'll be nice to get back, and we've seen so much during our visit over here.
Mrs. Avery says she can understand why so many of the younger people on the trip were so proud to be with the veterans.
I think we all must be very proud, but you being so young, it's wonderful that you've had the opportunity of sharing it with us all.
Gallipoli veteran Bob Ponsford also took time to look back on the trip.
Well, Mr. Ponsford, I remember the day before Anzac Day, you went down to the beach to get your photo taken for the AMP plaque.
That's right.
What was it like for you to go back down to the beach?
Well, it was a very moving experience, really, because I have memories of lost comrades there, and it was wonderful to see it again. But I was more particularly happy, and not so much for the beach, but to see the cemetery at Lone Pine, where I saw the grave of the chap who relieved me and lived a minute. That was a very moving experience for me. I've thought about him over the years, and I think I told you how I just stepped down from the parapet and said, "Keep your head down, Heck." He replied, "Why else I will." Dropped at my feet.
One thing Mr. Ponsford did miss from home was the football scores.
Oh yes, I've been a Melbourne supporter since 1902. And I saw them first, and of course I'm a member of the Melbourne Cricket Club, the 5th oldest member, they tell me. So,
And one thing that really got me was all those thousands of young Australians who went down to Gallipoli.
Yes.
That was something very special, wasn't it?
It was a very moving experience to walk along between the ranks of Australian young folk and be clapped and cheered by them. And they'd taken the trouble to turn up there on Anzac Day. It was really great.
Veteran Len Hall also looked back on the pilgrimage.
I've enjoyed it very much, with the exception of Lone Pine. It brought too many emotions back, you see. And I never realised how beautiful it was up at the neck until the other day when everything was peaceful. You know, it was beautiful, wasn't it?
What were the memories of Lone Pine?
Well, we only lost a few of my regiment there, as far as I can see. But it was just the way the service was read. See, of course, Hawke is a very good orator, and he made a very good speech. That's the Prime Minister, you know. And but taken all round, the trip has been a success. I prayed for it to be fine on Anzac Day, and prayers were answered.
So, Len, do you reckon you'll ever come back to Gallipoli again?
Oh, yes.
You are?
Oh, yes, I'll come back. Oh, yes. Yes.
And what do you want to do next time?
Just do it quietly, without any hustle. See? That's all. We've travelled, the wife and I have travelled for years and years, you see. But we never thought of coming here. I think we've been married over 68 years.
68 years?
Yes.
Wow.
And this is the first time we've really been separated.
And you met some Turk vets?
Oh, yes. Yes, I promised to send him photographs of Australia. So that'll be okay. That'll be done. And he was more emotional than me, I think, you know. He's a lovely old chap, put it that way.
And what else did he tell you?
Oh, well, he couldn't speak English. He had to have an interpreter to talk. But he was very, very glad, you know, to be able to meet one of us that, you know.
And what was it like meeting him?
Oh, it was very, very nice. It was, you know, it was a surprise to me. It was very nice. It was really lovely to meet him, you see.
You don't hold any grudges or feelings?
Oh, God, no. The Turkish army and the Australian army had as much respect for each other as if we were brothers, put it that way.
And that still lives on today?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes.
I also found Harry Newhouse and Jack Ryan enjoying a quiet beer before departure from the President Hotel in Istanbul.
Well, they wouldn't let me get out of Shrapnel Gully. I wanted to get out, but I signed my brother's name who got killed at the memorial, and I think it was great of the Turks to build that memorial. And they also the little memorial down on the beach. One bloke was telling me what it was, and reading all about it, and I think it was very good.
And what will you remember about Gallipoli 1990? What's been the best experience for you?
Well, I never had much experience. We got out early, and I went back to Egypt, but Gallipoli was very rough. I don't want to go back again.
You went there to find your brother's grave, didn't you?
Yes.
Did you find it?
Not a grave. Well, there was no grave. They're only crosses. But they wouldn't let me get off to see it. But what I done, when I was up at the memorial, his name was there. So I pointed my finger at the name, and they all took me photo, and I left a poppy down on the steps with the others.
Jack Ryan spoke about his love for the national anthem and the Australian flag.
Do you?
I said that. Well, when we were children, when we were young people, it was compulsory training, and we respected king and country. That's all gone now. And that's where thing up at the pine and plant that. You had to do the right thing, stand up and.
And what's been the best part of the trip for you?
Well, the best part was naturally going up, seeing where my old friends were. The body was still there, well, that's how it was anyway. No, it was good to, I paid respect. That's why I wanted to come on this trip, to pay respect for them, not for the free and, you know, yum around, but just respect for those that gave their all.
And it was a worthwhile trip?
In one way, of course, I was a little bit upset up there, you know, naturally. And I looked around and looked at them hills right, I think, well, them again. It wouldn't be the race. No. We were up at the top, and a few was let to go down to the pines. And I was lucky, I got a hit in the hip and got away.
Charles Cambridge had an interesting reflection on going back to Gallipoli.
Going back to the old town where you were born, and that been back for 50 years. I mean, so I never stopped there, but we passed it when we were on Gallipoli. We were in the place Shalagare.
You seem quite happy to tell your story of Gallipoli. Do you enjoy telling it?
Oh well, I mean, to say it's in your mind. You don't miss anything, because I mean, to say you've gone all through it. It's like running, looking second or third time of a good film. See, if you look at, it's just the same film, and I mean, you know all about it. You know, I mean, so
But do you think it's important for young Australians to know about Gallipoli?
Yes, for the simple reason why that it put Australia on the map. Well, then, when the war broke out in 1914, see, the Commonwealth had been formed then in 1900. Well, all the military forces and Navy come into one authority. Well, then, when the RAF went away in 1914, it was an Australian force. See, prior to that, all states had their own names. And it put Australia on the map. And I meant to say, from then on, from Gallipoli right through to the end of the war, the AIF, they've left their deeds have left their mark all around the world. The same as the Second World War.
While enjoying the whole trip, 92-year-old George Abrahams from Cherry Brook in Sydney couldn't pinpoint a specific moment on the trip that will live on in his mind.
Well, I'm just excited about the whole trip, and I can't pick anything out in particular. But I know it's something wonderful in my life. I never ever thought it happened to me. Go back to Gallipoli.
There's something like the dawn service or Lone Pine?
Yeah, the dawn service. I started to weep. I was so moved.
What were you thinking of?
Oh, I was thinking about the friends I lost there and all the different things. Very.
But it's been a worthwhile trip?
Oh yes, I wouldn't have missed it for the world. I was notified on the 21st of December that I'd been selected by hand letter that I'd been selected to go to Gallipoli, and the first thing I did was I rang my daughter and I said, "What do you think, Dolly, we call her?" I said, "Your father's going to Gallipoli," and she screamed. Yes, she was that excited.
On Qantas Flight 1916, the return journey, George Mitchell of Adelaide recalled the best moments of the pilgrimage.
I was very, very pleasantly surprised when I got a view of the Gallipoli. I never had any idea, what I was going to see. And of course, after 75 years, I thought everything would be obliterated. Now, when we came up the coach along the beach road, it was pointed out, there's Shrapnel Green. I looked across Shrapnel Green, I could see the whole plateau. I could see it, although all the trees were there, and beyond the green was the ridge of hills where I was stationed.
And when we were up at Lone Pine, I went for a bit of a stroll into the bushes and saw the trenches.
Yes.
You've had some interesting experiences in the trenches.
Yes, well, I saw some semblance on the coach going along. The semblance of the trenches was still there. That was up at the memorial.
Yep.
Yes, that's right. I saw that there, untouched, just as it was left.
Yeah.
I thought it was very, very nice to see that even.
Yeah. Did I read a story about you, and I hope I don't upset you when I say this, that you got shot out of the trench and crawled back and they threw a blanket over you?
Oh, yeah. Well, I've got to recall that story.
Huh?
You would like me to recall?
No.
I will give it to you because from Tasmania Post, that's right opposite Lone Pine, from Tasmania there's a gully and the hill coming over, you see. And of course we had to put on a demonstration. This was on the 19th of May. And we had to put on a demonstration. And of course we're called for volunteers to go over the top. Well, I went over with the 19 other personnel, and of course 11 of us got wounded. But coming back, they gave the order to retire, and of course I was laying there and I was all numbed after being hit. The second time it numbed my body, and someone said, "Come on, Darky, back we go." And I said, "I can't go." And he said, "Well, I'm going." See, so away he went. He apparently picked my rifle up and away he went. Well, of course, after a while, I lay there for a while and I thought, now, I've got to get back. Because fear came to me. Here I am out on my own, and I could hear the shell burst, see them bursting, and I thought, well, I'm going to go back. So I got up, and on my hands and knees, picking up my broken arm sort of thing, and got back. And, of course, I got to this, what they call the spider hole, and while I stood there for me to be received, I got one through the butt. And I said, I'm not waiting any longer. I said, catch me. and he didn't catch me. He held me too, so couldn't I come straight down the wall on my head. And this is the trouble with my neck today. Although I didn't know what had happened. Not until years after I found that I had injured the vertebrae. And
when I got down there, Corporal Miller said, I heard him say, so I'll throw the blanket over, he's finished. So he threw the blanket over, right over me, and after a while I picked up my left leg, which was sound leg, and I kicked it off, and I said, take that bloody thing off, I said, I can't breathe.
Mr Mitchell was adamant Gallipoli 1990 was much nicer than Gallipoli 1915.
You landed there with your uniform on, you never took it off for the 2.5 months. You were filthy bodily, you had no water to wash. You had very little to drink even, and there was no water to wash. Of course, every time you come out of the front line, you go back and reserve, and the first thing you do for the first 4 or 5 hours of your privileged time, you take your clothes off, sit and then turn them inside out, and go over every inch of the seam, cracking your eggs and the vermin toes, you know, and then you put them back in. Now, this is how we lived. And I always say, we were never hungry. There was plenty of bully beef. You always had bully beef.
But you had bully beef up to here.
Yeah, but you were always hungry for that variety of food which you never got. You know, the younger generation, they don't know how we lived. They couldn't live under those conditions today. They were really a spoiled generation.
Listening to George Mitchell and others like him brought home the horror of Gallipoli. He said young people of today don't know what the diggers went through. He's right. One of the younger people on the pilgrimage was 15-year-old legatee Graham Broadford.
It's an experience in a lifetime, you know. It's better than any dawn service, better than any Anzac I've ever been to. The amount of people that were actually at Gallipoli was thousands, and the young kids were, you know, the people, 21, thousands of them. I thought it was really good.
You and your brothers went running off into the bush when we were up at Lone Pine. Yeah. Tell me what you found up there.
Well, we found about 12 bullets and a whole heap of shrapnel. That's about it.
A few trenches?
Oh, the south, the trenches, they go for, it's unbelievable, they go for miles, some of them, just for miles.
And what about that big tunnel?
The tunnel. Oh, we found a huge tunnel, and so we had some glow candles, so we threw them down and went for a bit of a walk, and you can virtually stand up tall. Like, I'm just over 6 foot, and I can nearly stand up tall in the tunnel.
Some of the old diggers who lived in those for months. Do you think you could do the same?
No, we ran out because we saw snakes and spiders, and apparently I was talking to some of the old diggers, and they were telling me about the lice they used to get. And they used to get a two penny, and they used to scrape the lice away from their underwear, and they used to turn their underwear inside out once a week.
Well, what's going to stand out in your mind from Gallipoli 1990?
The diggers. They're a bunch of brilliant guys. They all work together. There's only a couple of them that are a bit cranky, but you've got to expect that. They're all over 90. No, they're a bunch of brilliant blokes, they really are. I think the diggers.
Did I hear, you might have been joking when you said it, you know, like it's the 75th anniversary this time. You reckon you'll come back for the 100th or something like that?
Yep, I'll come back for sure. I think a lot of the legatees will. I think it'll be a brilliant moment.
Michael McKernan is a historian with the War Memorial in Canberra. He says Gallipoli 1990 is very important from a historical aspect.
You've spoken to a lot of the diggers on the trip?
Yes, I have. I've enjoyed that. Again, it's not only a question of their physical endurance. I think their mental agility is something to marvel at. They have clear recall. They're able to put things into perspective. And I've also found a tremendous sense of reflective wisdom, where they can see things in context. They're not now the 20-year-olds that they once were, and they've had a life experience, and they're putting things in that context. It's very enriching.
One of the 26 nurse carers on the pilgrimage was Lorraine Matthews-Tannock, who has been working with Gallipoli veterans for 20 years.
They've coped very well, much better than any of us expected them to.
Any funny experiences to tell of?
Oh, there's been a few funny things, like Andrew Agnew telling me one morning I was a wonderful mother.
Well, you have been like mothers, though, haven't you?
I guess we have, because we've been the ones showing them around and getting them for meals and what have you, counting heads to make sure they're all there.
The commander of the Australian Defence Force Veteran Escort Group, Major Mary Brandy, says it was a very rewarding experience for all of the military on the trip.
It certainly is. I think it's something that, you know, an opportunity that they don't believe that they would have ever had, and I think some of them may not have realised how much it meant to them until they actually, we got on our way and they got to know the veterans, and then when we actually arrived at Gallipoli and they saw the small areas that these people had fought in, and they saw the conditions under which they fought.
RSL National President Brigadier Alf Garland says the pilgrimage has been the most satisfying experience he's had in his time with the RSL.
For me, it's been a great personal feeling to think that we have taken them over there. We've celebrated, or commemorated, I should say, the 75th anniversary well, and we've done it excellently well. And we're now within a few hours of home, and I think it's absolutely tremendous that it's all been done. And to me, it was one of those things which gave me a great deal of, I will say, pride in the fact that I was an Australian, and that we live in Australia, and that we've got a population who can show the feeling and the emotion and the commemorative spirit of those fellows that served originally in Anzac and came ashore on that morning of the 25th of April 1915.
The last word on the Gallipoli 1990 pilgrimage should go to the man behind it, Bill Hall.
Little did I realise exactly what the magnitude of the trip would be when I spoke to Mr. Beasley in March last year.
What was the most touching moment of the trip for you? Or touching moments?
I think that's better. There were so many touching moments. The dawn service, of course, is wonderful. Lone Pine, absolutely wonderful also. And then perhaps the little individual things that counted. When our First War veterans met the Turkish First War veterans and put their arms around one of those like lost brothers, to me that was a culmination of one of my dreams, that the veterans of two countries could get together. It's sort of is climax the right word? I'm not quite certain, but a culmination of a dream for myself and a dream for them, and I think, to me, it's absolutely marvellous.
So what do you think is going to happen to the spirit of Anzac now?
Well, I'm firmly convinced that the spirit has never gone, and I am confident what's happened this year will ensure that that spirit will continue and even get greater and greater. And it's my greatest wish that when we get back to Australia, that these fellows are not forgotten for 12 months. That they're precious, that many have never been spoken to collectively, say once every 12 when Anzac Day comes up. This has got to change, and it's up to us, particularly in the League, to ensure that that doesn't happen, and we give them all the respect and encouragement and love and whatever you could explain to them just exactly how we feel, and we keep them alive as long as we can.
It was an event which brought Australia together. Many tears were shed, not in sadness but in pride. It was one of the most remarkable projects ever undertaken by Australians, and one that will be in the minds of many for years to come. Thanks for this production go to the Department of Veterans Affairs, the Gallipoli Task Force, the RSL, the Australian Defence Forces, the Turkish Government, the Australian Radio Network, Steve Saylor from ABC Radio, and most importantly, the original Anzacs, whose legend will live on. I'm Andrew Woodward, and this has been Gallipoli 1990, The Pilgrimage.
Gallipoli, 1990, The Pilgrimage.